Hi, this is Karen Van Dieven with the Reed Tech marketing team. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar today, CBD Isn't a Drug or Is It? Where we'll be discussing the booming CBD product marketplace, how to navigate the current conflicting state and federal laws regarding CBD products, and how you can prepare for the impending FDA Cannabis-related product regulations. But before we get started with our presentation, let me quickly go over a few logistical items. If you're using your phone for audio, just want to make sure you know to dial in by phone 213-929-4231, and the access code is 885-649-201. This presentation is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all registrants after the presentation. We also will be having a live Q&A following the presentation, and we ask you to please submit your questions anytime during the question panel. We'll hold on to them, and then we'll relay them to the speakers at the end of their presentation. And you just follow the arrow there on the right-hand side and the dashboard to send your questions in. I'd also like to apologize. There seemed to be a little miscommunication regarding the timing of this webinar. Your invite said 2 o'clock, and then you received additional invite information that it was starting at 1:30. So I appreciate everyone making the adjustment to join us at 1:30. And if there are those that have missed it because of this miscommunication, not to worry. Again, if you registered, the presentation will be emailed to you, so you'll be able to take a look at it then. So right now I'd like to introduce our two speakers for today's discussion. We have Carolina Worth, who is an experienced FDA regulatory counsel with the law firm Arnell Golden Gregory, located in Washington, D.C. Carolina helps her clients successfully navigate and comply with the ever-changing and complex FDA regulatory requirements. Her clients include companies dealing with food, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, over-the-counter drugs, dietary supplements, and cosmetic products, with a particular focus on dietary supplements and cannabis-related products. Gary Sainer, our second presenter, is Senior Manager of Information Solutions here with Reed Tech Life Sciences Group. And Gary is a subject matter expert on medical device UDI, drug labeling, and other structured content reporting to the FDA and other regulatory agencies. He has over 35 years experience in the areas of software development, process management, and data administration, and a deep understanding of regulations, business requirements, and systems in the life sciences industry. So with that, I'll hand it over here to Carolina and Gary. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. This is Gary, and I'll act as the facilitator through the conversation today. So we'll have a lot of topics, and we're going to work in a conversational mode today with me asking a lot of questions. So I'm going to rely on Carolina to provide the good material and the answers as she is focused on this particular topic and able to serve as our subject matter expert today. So the topics I would like to go through are just set the stage a little bit, why we are here, and because this topic has a lot of confusion, we need to touch base on that and set the groundwork a little bit. We'll go through some terminology and history of cannabis and some of the regulatory activities related to cannabis. We'll then focus in on the U.S. federal landscape and also the state level. And I think what we'll find is that there's quite a diverse approach at the federal level versus the state level. And then we will then take a look at the industry takeaways. What is your particular approach if you are in this industry, if you have products or you're considering making use of cannabis or CBD or other type of ingredients in a product. What are the risks involved? What's the outlook? And as Karen mentioned, we'll reserve some time at the bottom for the Q&A. So let's get started. Why we are here. So Carolina, we have seen a huge amount of products out on the market and a lot of diversity. And maybe you can just drive us through a couple of these slides in the beginning about some of the variances that you've seen and whether they're legal or not. But then who are the players, and we'll get into some of the details. So can you help us out understanding what the marketplace has out there regarding cannabis?
Sure. Thanks for that introduction, Karen. And I want to also say thank you all for joining us today. And I'm excited to be here and kind of hopefully walk you through this topic. And I hope that you come away with a better understanding of what's happening with CBD and its current status. So why are we here? Cannabis and cannabis-related products, including those derived from hemp, have flooded the market definitely in the last couple of years, making all kinds of claims. I think these products have been around for a while, but particularly in the last year or so, it's been more aggressive since with the anticipated Farm Bill, which we'll talk about later in the program. But they're making all kinds of claims, and people, some people think that CBD is legal, other people understand that it's not. So the bottom line is CBD added to foods at the federal level legal now, and we'll get into the details of that in a little while. And you can see here some examples of things that have popped up in the marketplace. Everything from stuff for humans as well as pets. Even Carl Jr. got on board for 420, a date that's familiar in the space, I'm sure. And they tried a CBD-infused burger. And then you have these Stony Patch, which was a play on the Sour Patch Kids for those of us who enjoy candy. And that product had a little bit of attention this year, partly because some kids ended up eating some of it and having to go to the ER with stomach pains in Florida. So you see, here we have a lot going on, a lot of different products, a lot of claims from depression and cancer, autism, and a lot of players. And as you can see here, we have FDA, we have DEA, we have FTC, USDA is in the game, and as well as the state government. So it is an industry that's projected to reach $3 billion by 2023. And currently, liquid CBD supplements lead the market with 54%, followed by capsules and other types of products. So topicals, actually interesting, have grown about 180% in 2019. And food sales containing CBD is expected to be above 200% in 2020. So it's definitely an industry that it's here to stay, assuming FDA can figure out how to make it work. So it's important for us to get ahead of it and understand where we are and where we're going.
Very good. I think this next slide supports that conversation. We'll dive into the particular area for foods and beverages, and there's some products out there that claim they do have CBD infused ingredients. So any quick comments on what's going on here with the drinks and foods?
Yeah, like I said, generally the first thing you have to keep in mind, and as we see, there's no approved dietary supplement or food that can have CBD. CBD is, as we say here, it's almost as adding a prescription drug in FDA's eyes to your product. So you're not, these products, and we'll touch more on that later, but, you are taking risks here by marketing these products, by going ahead with selling these drinks. but generally, there's nothing that can be on the market right now, illegally on the market right now.
Yeah, very good. So the next couple of slides, I think we'll just kind of walk by, but they focus in on the various other products that are out there. You'll find some CBD at your local brewery, perhaps. There's coffee shops. I think you had mentioned earlier, and here's some additional examples of CBD that might show up in some of the kid foods and snacks and that sort of thing. And then CBD for your pets. Who would have thought, right? So the CBD is just hitting that particular area quite a bit. And then on a little bit more on the regulatory side, you get into some of the pharmacy areas where you can find CBD products inside these four walls at CVS or Walmart and that sort of industry sector. I think you had mentioned a little bit about the scope, and this is big. There's a lot of CBD activity. Anything that you want to add to some of the specs here about the size and number of listings at Amazon and so on?
Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, that this industry is projected to grow incredibly in the next few years. As you can see, those estimates here, 50 to 20 billion, definitely at least 3 billion by 2033, one of the numbers I found. But, Amazon and all these companies have their own policies for selling these products. It doesn't, you're still taking the risk, just because it's on Amazon, don't necessarily assume that it's a legal product and that it can be sold. And just keep in mind that a lot of the stuff being sold might be mislabeled. It says here 70% of online CBD cannabis extras might be mislabeled. So there's a lot of risk, and people are going fast and furious to the market. And so there's a lot of types of different products out there, but they're piling up. So it's prime time for FDA to try to figure out what they're going to do. Absolutely.
So with all that said, I think that was a good introduction. Let's get into some of the terminology. We've used a lot of terms so far, and maybe it's good to define them for the audience, and then we'll take a look at the history. So this particular slide has identification of cannabis, and maybe you'd like to dive into some of the details about the species and some of the derivatives that are created from cannabis.
Yeah, so as you can see here, when you think of cannabis as the plant has at least, 3 different species of it. The ones that we routinely are familiar with are hemp or marijuana. As you can see here from our slide, they're different plants. They're not the same. You can't take a marijuana plant and convert it to hemp. You can't take a hemp plant and convert it to marijuana. I'm sure maybe some people would disagree if you're an expert grower and you can somehow fuse the two, I don't know. But, they're separate plants, and that's one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about the legality of, what the Farm Bill change going forward. But as you can see here, hemp has a high degree of CBD, but is low on THC, which is the one, that gets people high, quote unquote. So when we're talking about hemp, we're talking about things that have traces of THC. So you're looking at less than 0.3% for you to be marketing a hemp product. And then you're looking at, when we're thinking of marijuana, which is still a Schedule I product, which means it's illegal to use, to sell. And you're looking at, higher levels of THC but lower CBD. I think one thing that people don't understand, and why it's important, and, we'll touch on this later, about understanding where your ingredients are coming from, is that you want to make sure CBD can be extracted from either plant. So you want to make sure that, you're getting the right ingredient when you're making your product. But as you can see here, these are 2 different plants. So we're going to focus, when we think hemp legal, you're thinking high CBD, low THC. Marijuana, there's no scenario here that we're going to talk about whether it could be legally added to anything, still Schedule I. Gary, did I lose you? Hello?
Hello, there you go.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Carolina. I think what we'll do is move ahead, but thank you for some of those definitions. I'm going to use CBD and THC in my conversation because they're a lot easier to pronounce. Moving ahead, some of the milestones over the course of time, I think we need to focus in on going way back to 1937. Maybe you could set the stage there, what originally transpired with that law, that tax act on marijuana, because that set the stage for where we are today, and then maybe a couple of those others that are noteworthy.
Sure. So as you can see here, we went back as far as 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, which not necessarily, it did end up prohibiting cannabis at the federal level, and it was mostly because of the taxes. So the taxes were so prohibitive that ended up pretty much prohibiting cannabis at that level, except for these limited medical uses. Before that, marijuana was not a focus so much in the federal government until we hit 1937, and then we get this tax act, the Marijuana Tax Act, which pretty much ends up making it prohibiting the cannabis sale because of the taxes. If you fast forward to 1970, we have DEA coming into the picture here, and they are with the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. They classify cannabis as a Schedule I drug, prohibiting the use. Schedule I is the most restrictive of all the schedules. There are 5 schedules that DEA deals with. It's the most restrictive. Basically, there's no medical use for the product and a high instance of abuse. So, for all those years until we get to 1996, cannabis, marijuana, class 1, including the hemp stuff. And then, in 1996, we start getting the states involved, and the wave starts to slowly shift, and California becoming the first state to legalize medical cannabis. And then, since then, we've had several other states go forward. As you can see, in 2012, you have Colorado and Washington, and we're not going to go through all the states. As you know, so far, we have 34 states that allow medical use of marijuana, and we'll see this chart a little bit later on. Then, from 2012, FDA and DEA have communicated over the years, and they have, at some point consider rescheduling of the drug, and, FDA didn't find enough data to do that the last time the DEA requested FDA's input. FDA will provide input to DEA, on class, scheduling. Fast forward to 2018, and we left a few milestones out in terms of the research that was allowed to be conducted, obviously under very strict circumstances, because you're dealing with a Schedule I substance. In 2018, FDA approved the first naturally derived drug, which contained CBD, a CBD-derived substance. So that was the first time. Before that, FDA had, in fact, approved a couple other drugs that contain a synthetic version of THC. So THC-containing drugs have been around in the market for a while, and synthetic versions of it, and it wasn't until 2018 that we have a drug, Epidiolex, which was approved for a naturally derived version of CBD that was approved. Of course, as we all know, in December of 2018, we have the hemp farm bill that was signed, legalizing hemp, and we'll talk about that definition a little bit later. Industrial hemp with THC less than 0.3%, and that prompted a lot of questions, a lot of issues, a lot more products flooding the marketplace, and we end up with FDA issuing a lot of information about their position on marijuana and CBD, and deciding to hold a hearing where they allowed industry to come in and present. And that hearing took place on May 31st, 2019 of this year. It was very well attended. I was there, and we can give you some of the highlights later. From that, since that point, FDA has been collecting data, opening a docket, and all those things. Fast forward to a few months later, we have Illinois becoming the first state to legalize recreational and commercial sale. So they passed a statute that allows basically sale of recreational marijuana. So that's where we are. I mean, I think, we have 34 states so far. 14 states have legal, have medical programs that are limited to CBD products. And then, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as you can see, the states have all taken action. Most of them have taken action so far. And we'll see a lot more activity probably as we go into 2020.
Thanks, Carolina. Hey, I just want to remind everybody to please submit your questions as we go along. There's a lot of information that is being thrown out at you, a lot of great information. And any questions, again, go over to the right-hand side there and send me your questions. Thanks.
Right, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Karen. I think what we'll do now is, while we're talking about regulatory activity, let's dive into a little bit deeper on the federal level, and then take a look at some of the state regulations that are in place. There's many different entities, organizations, agencies, and so on that are involved. Can you identify some of these logos on the screen for us, Carolina? There's a lot of players.
Sure. So this is an easy one. We have HHS, which is sort of the parent agency. So FDA comes under that. So that's pretty easy.
We'll knock that one out.
As everybody knows, the FDA is tasked with overseeing different kinds of products, and cannabis and cannabis-related products are no exception. They're marketed in forms that fall under FDA purview: foods, dietary supplements, cosmetics, drugs. So FDA comes from that perspective to ensure the safety, efficacy of products that are marketed. And then we have DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency, and they are tasked with regulating controlled substances, which marijuana still is, a class 1. And then we have an interesting player that some people tend to forget a little bit about, and it's the FTC and the Federal Trade Commission. They approach this whole situation from a different perspective. They're focused on advertising and making sure claims are not false, misleading. And so FDA will look at your product and basically say you are making drug claims or disease claims, and FTC will ask you, okay, you made those claims, where's your substantiation? That's a pretty kind of straightforward way of thinking of the two agencies. So FTC has started to get involved in this space as well, looking at substantiation for the claims that are being made for a lot of these products. And then you have USDA, which everybody knows, the Farm Bill, which it regulates production of hemp. It's under the purview of the USDA. Hemp is a crop, and USDA has authority over most of the agricultural items that we grow in the United States. So it makes sense that they're the ones dealing with the day-to-day production, cultivation of hemp products. And of course, you have the states. The states interplay with everything here. As you saw, the states are taking it upon themselves to determine whether they want to have cannabis or medical cannabis be legal in their state. They also take in a position on CBD, so they regulate at that level. And then, of course, you have the seal of the President of the United States here, which, signifies Congress and legislative powers, which can always tell agencies and issue statutes ordering agencies to do things. So all these players are, and as everybody knows, Congress has been fairly vocal lately about getting FDA to do something, given the size of the industry. in the types of products that are popping up in the market.
Very good. I'd like to go back to 1970, where we dive in a little bit deeper to the Controlled Substance Act, and we pick up the definition of marijuana back there as found in the law that was passed at that point in time. What's some quick takeaways on this Controlled Substance Act and having it become eventually a Schedule I product?
Yeah, here I think the interesting takeaway from putting this definition here, we don't have to read it all of it, but it gives you an idea of what was included in the definition of marijuana, and it's a good comparison when you go back and we'll look at the new definition of hemp under the Farm Bill, which, a lot of the issues before the Farm Bill was passed, going back to this definition, had to deal with the flowers and the seeds and things like that, where CBD was derived from, which was a controlled substance. So if you look at this definition, is a good comparison to what hemp is, so you know what you have is really hemp, if it falls under that definition, versus when you're looking at here at the definition of marijuana as it was established in 1970.
Yeah, and that differs from the definition of hemp that was recently defined in the Farm Bill. Let's go over there, take a look at some of the details in the 2018 Farm Bill and how hemp was carved out in the actions regarding the Controlled Substance Act for the defined hemp product.
Yeah, and as you can see here, hemp has a very specific definition as any part of that plant, including the seeds, all derivatives, extra cannabinoids, salts, isomers, and all this, as long as your concentration of THC is less than 0.3%. And that's important because anything above that, even if it's hemp-derived, could get you in trouble with DEA. So DEA is going to be looking at your product and seeing how much THC is in it. So, quality control, as we'll talk about later, is important in knowing that if you want to have hemp, you have to make sure it's under 0.03% THC. Otherwise, it's not going to be legal hemp. Also, as you can see, the Farm Bill excluded hemp from the definition, and so the possession, manufacture, sale, distribution of industrial hemp and its byproduct is no longer illegal under federal law. And then, while this happened, the interesting part is that the Farm Bill does preserve, and as we'll see later, the FDA's authority to regulate cannabis-related products. So this has not changed. Also hasn't changed the marijuana to Schedule I. And, we have to keep these things in mind going forward as we evaluate what kinds of products and what the risks are in bringing products to market.
Yeah, building on that, with the FDA's position still having jurisdiction over those particular products that are outside those particular hemp definitions, there is some detail that is in this next slide about the CBD and how it is able to be marketed and what's the FDA's position on that, and whether or not it's able to be included as a dietary supplement or a food. And it looks like it's still very controlled by the FDA, and there's some details in here that I think would like to learn about.
Yeah, so if you remember nothing else, just remember that FDA does not care where your CBD comes from. If it comes from hemp, they don't allow it to be included in a food or a dietary supplement. If it comes from marijuana, definitely not allowed to be in a food or dietary supplement. So they're not concerned with the source of your CBD. So when you're thinking of marketing and you're thinking on levels of risk. And we'll again touch base on that a little bit further later, but it is so how much risk do you want to take? So FDA's position is basically that you cannot have CBD added to your food or dietary supplement because under the statute, any article that has been already approved as a drug, and we're thinking here Epidiolex, which was a CBD product approved, or that has been studied, and even though Epidiolex was only approved in 2018, we have to remember that part of the statute involves clinical investigations. So these substances have been studied under investigational new drug applications for quite a bit of time. So FDA's position is that because of those two things, CBD there's no exemption that applies to this, and it simply cannot be included in a dietary supplement or food. Cosmetics are a little bit different. These restrictions that I just talked about apply to dietary supplements as specifically under the statute, but cosmetics are under a different regulatory scheme. And but even with that said, if you're making drug claims for your cosmetic, disease claims, let me make that more clear, disease claims, then your product can be considered a drug. So you have to think about that as well. FDA, basically what they're thinking is there's too many open questions in this space at this point. They don't know what the appropriate dosage is. Are there any drug interactions for these types of products? And, what are the side effects? And, when GM Pharma, who's the manufacturer of Epidiolex, studied CBD for that particular epilepsy drug, but during their investigations, they found that there might be some drug interactions between CBD and some blood thinners and some other types of products. So these, FDA is still a safety-focused agency. They're a data-driven agency. So there's still a lot of questions left to be answered for them to move forward at this point.
Yeah, very good. It looks like FDA still has a very firm position and pretty clear as to what can be included, what cannot be included. But they are also open to some commentary and did have a public hearing, and that's a good transition over to a summary of what was held. There was a public hearing back in May 31 of this year on CBD, and I believe you had mentioned, Carolina, that you were there. What were some of your takeaways?
Yeah, it was, like I said, it was a very well-attended hearing, which resulted from all this, the industry growth, and I think a lot of the misinformation that's out there. And there were all types of presenters, from retailers to GM Pharma, who is the manufacturers of Epidiolex. That now then acting Commissioner Dr. Sharpless basically reiterated the same position that CBD in food products and dietary supplement is not permitted. Throughout all the oral statements that I heard from the different sectors, my takeaway is FDA was very concerned about dosage. They were very concerned about cumulative effects. There were questions about, well, what happens if somebody is taking a dietary supplement that contains CBD and then they're using a lotion that contains CBD and then they're doing something else, and you have people taking all these different types of products at the same time. And one thing that was pretty common across the board was no one was able to, at least publicly at that point, provide them with any kind of guidance as to what an appropriate dose should be. That question kept coming up a lot throughout the hearing. Interestingly enough, it seemed like at least everyone in some form or another wanted FDA to create a regulatory pathway for CBD-related products, particular because, to avoid an issue with the federal and the state regulations just being so mismatched as they are now. So I think, people were on the same page in terms of going forward with some type of pathway. I mean, in some ways, the industry it has grown so much and it's out there already. It's kind of putting, they already put the cart before the horse. So it's trying to figure out how to move forward. There were a few people who opposed it, but most people seem to be on the same page on that point. And then, FDA did promise at that hearing that they would provide more guidance this fall. It's almost winter now, but and they have provided minor updates and here and there, but nothing yet in terms of what they want to do. And they were collecting comments. So last time I checked the docket, there were over 4,000 comments that were submitted to FDA. And a lot of the commenters and presenters said that they would provide FDA with scientific evidence. So it'd be interesting to see if they did receive some of that data.
Yeah. Now, what is your particular feeling and expectation? Do you think the FDA would still roll out something this fall yet, or is it going to slip into next year?
It's hard to say. I mean, like I said, fall's almost over. Sometimes, you get a flurry of activity from FDA, at least my experience being at the agency right before the holidays and everybody gets ready to go for to spend time with their families. Sometimes there's a little bit of activity at the end. I think they have a lot to think about. My best guess is that this is going to spill into next year, unless something drastic really happens in that space in the next few weeks. But we're really running out of time for 2019. I think if we see anything, it'll probably be in 2020 at the earliest. But there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to the agency taking action. So we're not just, they're not looking at it in a vacuum. So.
Right. So on the other side of that, some parties have heard from the FDA, and it's not a good venue. There has been some enforcement by the FDA and FTC by issuing some warning letters. There's a couple examples here that we'll take a look at, but do you want to set the stage for these warning letters and where they come from and what happens when a warning letter is received by a manufacturer?
Sure. So FDA has been active. We picked a couple of recent warning letters, but FDA has been active sending warning letters on these types of products for several years. In 2019, so far, they've sent 7 warning letters. The last letter here, this October 2019 letter, was actually a joint letter between FTC and FDA. But FDA has clearly said that they will take enforcement action against companies that are making egregious claims and that are, potentially misleading consumers. And FDA is thinking of, these consumers who could be misled into basically not taking their cancer medication because they're believing the claims that some of these manufacturers are making, as you can see here. Someone could stop taking their cancer medication because they think CBD is going to cure that or treat it. So FDA has been very concerned about that, and a lot of the letters have focused on things like this, effective in killing human breast cancer cells, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. So they're looking at disease claims that are clearly could have a negative impact on the public's health if somebody with these conditions were to stop taking their prescription medications. As you can, in the October 2017 letter, which was a joint effort with the FTC, the FTC clearly explained what is unlawful from their perspective. Like I said, FDA is going to look at your products and they're going to say, you're making disease claims. You're not allowed to. You don't have a new drug application to make those claims. So if you're making disease claims, if you're telling somebody you're going to cure a disease, then you're a drug. And unless you're over-the-counter drug, which there are limited uses for those, and when you think over-the-counter, we're thinking of Tylenol or things along those lines. And those products have monographs, or there's some limited ones that are approved in the new drug applications, but the majority of them have monographs. And there's nothing like that for CBD. CBD doesn't have a monograph. CBD is a drug ingredient, according to FDA. So if you're making these disease claims, they're going to be looking for a new drug application. So the FTC comes at it from a different perspective in terms of just looking at the advertising. So for them, you're not allowed to advertise that a product can prevent, treat, or cure human disease unless you possess competent and reliable scientific evidence. So for FTC, when we're looking at that kind of standard, you're thinking of well-controlled human clinical trials that are, double-blind, placebo controlled trials that have shown that the product is safe and effective, and that can substantiate something such as CBD may reduce the risk of diabetes, which is one of these implied health claims. And don't think because you're saying something, as you can see here, this company wasn't saying CBD reduces the risk of diabetes. They're saying may reduce, but it's still an implied disease claim. So you're implying that you can reduce the risk of diabetes. Just by the wording doesn't mean that you're not making a disease claim that FDA could take exception to. And of course, we picked out some of the most egregious ones, and that's what FDA is focusing their enforcement at this time. But always remember, the agency can pivot at any moment and decide to go after any product, regardless of the claims in this space.
Well, thanks for that review. That kind of sparked some interest, and I did a little bit of research in using one of the Retech tools, Retech Navigator, for drug labels, and did some searches for active ingredients and inactive ingredients, and you see some of the results of that investigation, where there are a number of products that are listed on the Daily Med. So this is a repository hosted by the National Library of Medicine, but fed through the FDA's listing activities. And there's various product counts that are associated with each of those ingredients that you see there. In the bottom of the screen was some of the presentations that I was able to generate with this particular search. And the one drug that does have an NDA, Epidiolex, is listed there and highlighted. But this was a way for me to find out some of the products that are listed that include, the various cannabis and hemp and so on. Number of dietary supplements. There's a number of unapproved homeopathic products, and there's also a number of OTC monograph, not finals, that are listed. And in many cases, you'll see hemp oil or hemp seed oil listed as an inactive ingredient, and therefore it came up in my search. But there's other products that you as a manufacturer might have as your active ingredient, and there might be a monograph for that. But as Caroline had mentioned, there's not a particular monograph for hemp or cannabis or cannabidiol. I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to move on. We can talk a little bit more about that in another venue if you would like. But quickly, let's take a look at the states. There's some two slides here, one on the marijuana laws and what is happening on the CBD front. So can you quickly summarize those, Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point of this slide, and we don't want to go into the weeds of this, no pun intended, but, you can see across the United States how the majority of the states have done something with regard to marijuana itself. This is not hemp, this is marijuana. So, I think 34, maybe 33, I got to check my numbers again on that, but have legalized marijuana to some extent, either recreational or medicinal. And so you can see there is a movement to find a way for these products at the state level, and just leaving a handful of states that, still consider this product to be legal in any capacity. It's interesting, Washington, D.C., where I am right now, they don't allow, it's an interesting thing. You're not allowed to sell marijuana for recreational purposes, but somebody's allowed to gift you up to two I think it's 2 ounces for personal use. So it's it's a very interesting setup here in DC in terms of recreational marijuana. And we can talk more about that if anybody's interested to go to that depth of levels in terms of the state regulations. And here we look at the CBD, and this is more key to this webinar because, as you can see, the states understand FDA's position since it's been fairly clear and consistent in terms of what they think. But some of the states have decided that sometimes you can add it to your product. And they have allowed passed laws, and you can see the one in the lighter green has passed, laws to say that it's okay under certain conditions. Then you have these other products that have said yes, it's okay, especially to given permission, and others just saying it's okay under certain conditions. I mean, California, and then you got the rest of the states who have said, no. California is one of the states that have specifically said you are not allowed to have CBD in food, even if it contains CBD oil that's derived from industrial hemp. So, some of the states have sided along with FDA, and some of the states have said it's fine. So that adds to the confusion. So, going back to FDA's authority, if you're selling across state lines, that's what brings FDA in. If you're in one of these states and you have a local store, and you are not going to be selling outside of your state, you have to follow your local state laws. The minute you put something on the internet, you're immediately basically in interstate commerce because anyone, anywhere in the United States can access your website.
Yeah, so it's very important to understand what boundaries you're marketing to and where you're distributing. Let's move on to some of the industry takeaways. And this will be our final section. So, given what we know today, what could come tomorrow?
Yeah, so I think, based on what FDA has been doing in the enforcement space, I think we'll continue to see FDA, probably FTC, warning letters come through with companies that are, taking lots of risk with their marketing, social media or websites. I think that's, those are easy for FDA to find. And I think they'll continue to do that, exercise their enforcement discretion and go after those egregious claims. I think that the last three are kind of a little bit interrelated because, it's been generally agreed at this point that, CBD would be a new dietary ingredient, which means, it wasn't used in the food supply before, so we will have to show safety. We'll have to, manufacturers will have to show safety and, show that they have a good manufacturing process. And I think, that the NDI pathway, which is most likely what will end up happening at the end, would be dependent on, these other two things in some ways, because as we said before, FDA has found that there's no evidence that CBD was used before it was studied in an investigational new drug application or before it was approved to be used for Epidiolex. So we have to basically issue a regulation that would allow us to create a loop around that prohibition under the statute. So you'll be looking at that. So FDA could, on their own, decide we're going to issue this regulation, which will go through comment. The whole process of issuing a regulation takes time. They have to go through notice and comments, which means they'll put a regulation together. It'll go published in the Federal Register, and people will have an opportunity to comment on the proposal before FDA issues a final rule. That process, I've seen it work pretty fast at FDA in some very limited circumstances, and very slow in others. So it really depends on, the resources that the agency is putting into it internally. And I know they have a lot of resources. One of my partners here at AGG just came out of FDA, and he was on that working group looking at CBD. So, I know there are resources being allocated to that internally, but the rulemaking processes can be lengthy. And then, a shortcut to that rulemaking process could be Congress just telling FDA in a statute that they can't allow CBD to be added to food, even though it's been studied before. So I think, we have 3 and 4 who kind of need to happen for 2 to happen. But I think the new dietary ingredient pathway, which is interesting because FDA, these submissions are very specific to the manufacturer. So pretty much almost everyone, or if not everyone, who has a product will have to submit one of these things if that's the way it goes. And you have to submit data about your product, about your manufacturing process, and your ingredients. So it's very specific to the company.
Very good. With the remaining time, I think we'll take a quick look and summarize some of the practical things. So
Sure.
There's a couple items here about what are the risks involved, what type of strategy, what approach one should take, and what you're going to need. So are you able to hit just a couple of the key takeaways for those in the audience that are looking at CBD and think about using it in their products?
Sure. So I think, to give you guys time for asking questions, again, what are the risks? You can start with a warning letter. FDA could, progress to seizing your product. You can have an FTC investigation on your hands for substantiation. Consumer litigation is picking up. There's been a few lawsuits filed against manufacturers in different states for not having the amount of CBD they say their products have. And of course, if you're trying to be a player in this industry, it can ruin your reputation, right? You're going to be publicly, people are going to know that you got a warning letter as a public database. So with those risks in mind, one of the things that people should think about is what kind of product are you marketing, what's your intended use, and then follow the appropriate FDA regulations. So if you want to be a food, market your product as a food, look at the food regulations. If you want to be a dietary supplement, there's specific dietary supplement regulations for GMPs and things of that nature. Make sure you have quality ingredients. Like I said, consumer litigation is picking up. You want to make sure you have the amount of CBD in your product that you say you do. And then what's your level of risk? I mean, like I said at the beginning, this is not a market where we're selling a product that if you do X, there's no risk. There is a risk. It's just different levels of risk. So if you, try to have substantiation for your claims if you're going to make any type of claim, but, know that, it's what's your risk tolerance at this moment before FDA actually takes action and says, you need an NDI, we're going to allow it and you need an NDI, which, could be where the agency is going.
Those are really good practical suggestions. Thank you, Carolina. There's a couple others that I just want to highlight as well. You had mentioned earlier about making claims, and in particular, if you make claims for the use and diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of a disease, then it looks like you've crossed the line into FDA regulated drug. And there are some good suggestions here on the screen to confirm with regulatory counsel. And Carolina, you're my go-to. So I'm going to be talking to you if I was a manufacturer. But then there's obviously regulatory pathways that need to be identified. Is this a new drug, or is this possibly a inactive ingredient in a OTC monograph, that sort of thing. The other point I wanted to make is we here at RETAC are in the business of providing support for preparation of SPL labeling. So in the event that you do need to have your labeling approved, or if you simply list your product, we're able to prepare that information in electronic format, structured product label, and do the submissions to the FDA for you. And in similar fashion, if you are falling into the category of this dietary supplement area and want to go ahead and list the product, again, check with Carolina and then find out what those guidelines are. There's some prerequisites that you want to be aware of in the event that you have a new ingredient. And again, to list that dietary supplement, we're able to help you along those lines. And with that, I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. And Karen, I'm going to ask you to jump in here and let us know if there's been some questions. And I imagine there might be a lot of them, but why don't you go ahead and pose some questions, and Carolina and I will be glad to help answer.
Well, this certainly was an interesting topic. We have many questions, so I'll apologize right now that we won't be able to get to all of them, but I do have them. We will get back to you and respond back to you. And again, when we finish here, if you have any additional questions, we haven't had an opportunity to go into detail. Again, please give us an email. You'll have contact information afterwards. So the first question I have is, as noted, the CBD labels are often not compliant. So what is the required labeling for CBD products? If I have a CBD product, how do I find out what is the correct way to label my product?
So I'll take that one, Gary. And I think the easy answer is you first have to figure out what kind of product you have. If you have a food, you want to, let's forget about claims for a second. If you have a food product, you want to look at to see where's my nutritional facts panel. I will have to add that to it. That little panel with the calories and all the different disclosures. That's something to think about. What do I have to, if you're selling a food, you have to register as a food manufacturer. So that's another thing that you have to think about. And then labeling. There's a labeling guide that FDA has for food products. So the first key thing to determine is what kind of product you're selling. If you're selling a dietary supplement, you have a supplement facts panel, which has to be the information has to be presented in a certain order. Same with the nutritional facts panel. If you have a cosmetic, you have to think about what's required in a cosmetic label, which are, we all see in cosmetic labels, you have how much is in the product, what the ingredients are. And these are things without the labeling, again, and what the standards are in that particular industry for manufacturing, for sourcing ingredients, for keeping track of things, because if you want to remain a player, you should follow those as well. So it's not just the CBD, you have to think about what other FDA regulations apply to your product as well. And there are definitely lots of them in terms of what's required on a label, and that's something that, we routinely help people with.
Okay, thank you. Next question, what is FDA's position on using CBD as an excipient in a product containing an approved over-the-counter active?
I think FDA's, for a drug, if you have, so it's still a risk. FDA hasn't opined on that specifically, but if you have an over-the-counter product that you're marketing under a monograph or a pending monograph, I'm not talking about homeopathic, so that I'm talking about actually having an OTC monograph, and you have a legitimate, you have it as an excipient and it has a legitimate purpose and you're not making claims, FDA has not opined on that yet. So I would list it under the ingredient statements and wait to see how that all shakes out.
Yeah, I did notice when I was doing a little bit of research that many of the products that we discussed, cannabis, hemp seed oil, CBD, there are substance identifiers. So the FDA does have a list of substance codes referred to as unicodes, unique identifiers. But just because there's a code for a particular substance doesn't mean that it could be used as an approved ingredient. So I think it does come down to an evaluation of what you're doing with it, and there is also some information that is used for hemp seeds, and when you get over to the food industry, by the way, the seeds and hemp seed oil that are used in foods, there's a little bit different leeway there. So Karen,
there's different. Sorry, I was going to say there are some grass uses for hemp seeds that are very specific to food products, but for OTC drugs, I think that's still kind of uncharted waters. So you should have some substantiation as to why you're adding the ingredient to your product.
Okay, Wow, we're on time, even with all that conversation. And again, apologies for those, a lot of questions in here, and we will certainly get to each of those questions, respond to you. You also can contact Carolina and Gary at this information on this slide, and also you will be receiving these slides shortly after this presentation. We really do appreciate everyone joining us, and we thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolina.
Thanks, Carolina.
Thank you, guys. Thanks,
All right,
everyone. Bye-bye.